Hi, everyone. So before we get going, I've been asked to announce that the PowerPoint presentations for all the speakers will be available soon. And that's probably sometime in the next week or so. But you may have noticed the video broadcasts for some of the days, I know definitely day one, is already up on the website. So you can tune in to all the sessions from day one and share that link with your colleagues back home who couldn't make it, and the rest of the days will be made available progressively online too. So our second session of the day is about civil and military collaboration. In this session, we will explore how military lessons learned, as well as operational inputs, can optimize our progress on a regulatory framework that addresses all stakeholders' needs safely and efficiently. And I don't think I could think of a better moderator to take us through this than Mark Wuennenberg. Mark is a 35-year veteran of the Royal Canadian Air Force. He has been responsible for the creation of foundational UAS regulations and guidance material for the Canadian Armed Forces, the United States Air Force, and NATO. Most recently, Mark was a subject matter expert on UAS with Transport Canada. He is currently a technical officer in the ICAO RPAS Secretariat, where he supports the RPAS panel, is the secretary for the Small UAS Advisory Group, and the lead for ICAO's Drone-Enabled Symposium, which I hope you'll all be staying for the next 2 days. Thank you, Mark. Over to you.
Morning, everyone. As Phil said, welcome to the Civil-Military Collaboration session. It is truly my pleasure to be the moderator for such a distinguished group of experts, both from ATM, ANSP, UAS experience, and we have a good variety today to hopefully provide a good summary and a good example to you of how military-civil cooperation can work. Having experienced both the military and civil operations and being a regulator for both sides, I've seen both the benefits and the missed opportunities that coordination could provide. So I believe this is an invaluable panel session, and I hope you get much out of it. Although the civil and the military operators have different, let's call them goals, from the military side, it's a mission accomplishment. From a civil side, it's more of an economic opportunity. How they achieve those goals can be very similar. They have to go through the same airspace. They have to operate safely. So that's why it's such an important aspect that we have these kind of coordination activities. So far this week, you've heard various panels. Let's look at implementing harmonized regs, balance between legacy and innovation, RPAS training development, the last one impacting other stakeholders. All of these panels would benefit from military-civil coordination and passing those lessons learned back and forth. Around the world, militaries today have decades of experience in operating UAS of all size, including RPAS. They have literally millions of flight hours. For those states out there that are doing regulatory activity, it's all about data. The militaries have that data. They've been doing this for 20 years, and I said, built up millions of flight hours to provide that kind of data to help the regulatory activities. At the same time, the military is a key stakeholder. When civil side is creating regulations, creating policy, creating procedures, those could impact the civil side. So to make sure there's no negative impact, the military and the civil need to work together for that. For today's session, there's sort of two focus areas that would be good to be focused on. Those are the first, collaboration between civil military ANSPs, which include how to effectively bring those military lessons learned, whether they're at home in their own state or whether they're from operational activities, how to bring those into to regulatory development efforts. The other one being from the other direction, what does the military side need from the civil to more effectively operate from their side of the house, both again in a combined airspace, combined environment. As with the previous panels, I'd ask you to use the app or the web application for submitting questions. As we're switching between our panelists, please start thinking about those questions that you might want answered by the group. So now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Jorge Vargas. Currently works in the planning division of the Brazilian Air Force and is the head of the division for coordination and control, as well as for RPAS control, or coordination. His career courses include air tactics, combat pilot, flight safety officer, combat squad lead, and the chief controller for military operations. So Jorge, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mark, for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm honored to have been invited to be here representing the Brazilian Air Force. I was invited to talk about military operations, and my presentation at the beginning was restricted to that theme. But for you, Filippo, if I may, after military operations, we will talk about small UAS too. We are applying in Brazil a specific practice for some UAS activities and have been seeing excellent results. As a short script, we will see how we are developing military operations using RPAS. Our great concern is to develop flights with doctrine, open minds to results, instead keep the focus on the risks. Of course, without forgetting safety comes first. Answering a simple question, how to develop these steps. How to introduce this technology in a safe environment. And we know that we should use simple answers to simple questions. So, we believe that we will reach this goal, leaving fear behind and facing this new component and its opportunities. We have seen the smalls as a big laboratory, useful and not so expensive, using them, and it works very well. Since 2008, a strategic document from Brazilian government called National Defense Strategy defines that Brazilian Air Force must be responsible for developing the rules for RPAS accessing Brazilian airspace, observing the promotion of industry and the development of technology for this new component. In Brazil, we have at least 2 separate entities that speak about rules applied to UAS, ANAC and DSEA, and you will understand their competences in a presentation with Mr. Jorge Regis. In 2009 was started the process for Brazilian Federal Police, BFP, be able to access the Brazilian airspace using RPAS and aircraft from Israel, Iran, that you know as Hunter. In December of 2009, the first flight was done in Brazil. In 2011, the first squadron, the first squadron of the 12th group was created, and its doctrine at the beginning was based on BFP experience. When you talk about air support, troop support, self-defense, possibilities, and an infinity of applications, Brazilian Armed Forces, Air Force, Navy, and Army started developing their skills and doctrines, focus on mistake analysis and improving good practices. Using this point of view, we develop a kind of operations which we call specific or differentiated ops. 2014, the Brazilian Navy starts an onboard RPA project. The Brazilian Navy has used, in a partnership with the industry, 2 types of aircrafts. Camcopter S-100, assembled in Austria, Scan Eagle, assembled in USA. The largest goal was provide support for their ships. Also in 2014, Brazilian Army started using RPAS to provide troop support, field recon, and after analysis, other results have been reached: a minor collateral damage and collateral effects, and a massive use by security forces. Now, we have some activities that we've been involved with. World Cup, the first time that the RPAS squad was used in a civilian scenario using military doctrine, and in 2016 Olympic Games. The results were unquestionable, and for the first time, we saw the possibility of applying them to police operations and to other public safety operations. Because they, the police, were inside in the command center. We needed to define an efficient law strategy, an official law enforcement strategy to make it work. In 2017, we started specific rules for police, entities of safety public, and other entities from government, all due to the excellent results achieved in Olympic Games. We needed to think something that worked in a coordinated and controlled way. All operations should be requested or at least informed, aiming to have an idea of growth of the sector and its needs. As said by Mr. Mike Lisson, we are men, and when I get a new television, we put the manual in a drawer and try to figure out how it works by ourselves. Thus, the rules should be simple, practical, direct, with good understanding and commitment, never forgetting safety. As I said, now I start to talk about small UAS applying them in government actions. When a soldier can see the results of his actions, predicting hostile environments, he believes in the process and its results, and he feels that need to enforce the law. When we have an RPAS operation in a segregated airspace using block levels from flight level 110 to 140, for example, with more than 5 hours in flight, when the remote pilot calls ATC unit using RPA at the beginning of the transmission, everyone, pilots and controllers, has to understand that flight is under control and is safe. So, using the same picture used on the last meeting here, but with other words, the authorities must define airspace rules, and they need to be possible and feasible. The industry understands the rules and help to apply them. Pilots understand the rules and the consequences if they are broken. Civil society trusts the rules because they can help to set them, and it happens in Brazil. It's a hard work. The results have been reached, and people are understanding why to use rules. Obviously, in the first moment, we are forced to apply penalties, and people were arrested. For example, this notice was about a pilot flying over people and near from the police's helicopter. And the results can come as a criminal charge. As a proof, after disclosure of enforced fines and people being arrested, many pilots were forced to understand that they need to follow the rules. As you can see on this slide, In January and March of this year, we had an increase of the number of pilots and aircraft registered in our system. It happened after the event at Congonhas Airport in São Paulo, and because pilots were arrested in the carnival when they flew without authorization over people. And these numbers are increasing day by day. Always aiming results and opportunities, we have now some operations from government agencies. Operations to find and fight the dengue mosquito, saving lives. In addition, the use by the police, which provide a new approach to situations with a big risk involved. For finish, the Firearms Initiative, launching floats to decrease the time of assistance to a drone person. Each use and doctrine develop new ways of use arise and show what is important to seek. We have other examples here. Firemen fighting against fire, pilots formation, disturbs control, searching people, guiding troops and teams, and surveillance ops. The Brazilian RPAS rules are made for pilots, entities, and explorers, maintaining a safety access, always observing the best practices, local and international. And I said several times by Ms. Leslie, since UASSG, these documents must be kept alive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George, for starting us off so well. Our second speaker today is Mr. Jorge Regis. He has been an air traffic controller since 1990, with experience in military operations and airspace control. Mr. Regis acted as a controller of military air operations for more than 15 years and is trained in the areas of air traffic management and as well as responsible for conducting risk assessments. Since 2009, Mr. Regis has participated in activities to support the accommodation of RPAS into Brazilian airspace control system, having been part of a multidisciplinary team responsible for assessing the risks involved with the operation of the HARE UAS, something getting towards an RPAS level when we talk about UAS sizes. As a member of the Brazilian RPAS committee, for almost a decade, Mr. Regis has contributed to the establishment of the regulatory framework for unmanned aircraft within Brazil. George.
Thank you, Mr. Mark, for your introduction. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for being here and for giving me the opportunity to present some of the activities we've been involved with in Brazil. As we know, a video or even a picture can represent more than 1,000 words. Because of that, I'd like to share with you a short video regarding some UAS activities already in place in Brazil. Yeah. So that is what Brazil has been doing regarding UAS activities. I'm going to talk about UAS activities already in place in Brazil. For that, we'll be going through the following script. I'm going to talk about Brazilian aeronautical authorities and their responsibilities. Some UAS activities, more specifically from 2009 to current days. The growth of UAS operations, and in order to face this growth, some initiatives already in place in Brazil. So, as you can see, we have in Brazil two aeronautical authorities, the Civil Aviation Authority and Military Aeronautical Authority, both working together in order to allow this technology on our skies in a permanent civil-military cooperation. Let's talk just a little bit about which one of them. First, our Civil Aviation Authority, known in Brazil as National Civil Aviation Agency, who is responsible for, among other things, for civil aviation regulation and safety oversight. Personal license according to Annex 1 of Chicago Convention. Registration marks according to Annex 7 of Chicago Convention. And the last but not least, airworthiness certificate issued according to Annex 8. So this is responsibility of our Civil Aviation Authority in Brazil. And the second, Department of Airspace Control, our Military Aeronautical Authority, who is responsible for aeronautical meteorology according to Annex 3 of Chicago Convention. Aeronautical Telecommunication Service according to Annex 10. Search and Rescue according to Annex 12. Aeronautical Information Service according to Annex 15. And the last but not least, Airspace Control. So this is our big five in Brazil, our military authority in Brazil. So the UAS operator must be aware of our Brazilian aeronautical authorities in order to operate safely in our skies. This is very important to you to understand. So let's talk about some UAS activities already in place in our country. The first document regarding airspace access by unmanned aircraft system was issued in 2009 by the Department of Airspace Control. This document was based on Article 8 of Chicago Convention. After that, as Mr. Jorge said in the previous presentation, Brazilian Federal Police started their operation in the Brazilian west border. The main goal was smuggling, combat, and surveillance. The project was a huge challenge for the Brazilian Aeronautical Authority as well. The UAS was accommodated in Brazilian skies by the segregation, sorry about that. Sub-areas were created and activated by demand, and as you can see in the left side of the slide. There was a letter of agreement, the operations handbook, widely spread among operators, ANSP, and ATCO as well. The Brazilian Federal Police has flown already 2,500 hours of flight without any incident. It was a huge challenge for us as well. Back in 2010, we had the second edition of document regarding space access by UAS. The document was issued in September 23rd. It was based on knowledge acquired from UAS-SG, Unmanned Aircraft System Study Group, which Brazil was part of. 2011, we started the research and development Brazilian universities. The operation took place in the south of Brazil, in a populated area. The main goal was precision farming operations. The operation was accommodated by the airspace segregation. The main concern was the agricultural aviation protection. Here we can see the operation made by Brazilian Navy in the southwest of Brazil. Due to the huge offshore traffic, it was a big challenge for us. Their airspace was segregated in order to maintain the safety in operation. In 2015, we issued the third edition of a document regarding space access. It was issued in December 15th. The document was based on Doc 119 issued by ICAO in February, I think. This was as well a big challenge for us. Here we had the first civilian medium altitude long endurance aircraft operating Brazilian skies. The aircraft, as Mr. Jorge said, was assembled in Israel. This operation was researched and developed. The operation was surrounded by the São Paulo terminal area, the most busiest airspace in Brazil, with more than 600,000 movements each year. All the technology acquired from the previous 2000 smuggling combat and 2014 World Cup operation was very important for the viability of this mission, the military legacy. In 2016, we issued the fourth edition of our document. As you can see, a living document. Issued in December 22, the new edition has approved online requests, which the main goal was to automate the UAS access requests for some specific cases such as Veloz operation and 400 feet AGL. As you can see here, in 2018, we had an operation with a partnership with the Brazilian petrol company, Petrobras. The type of operation was a pipeline inspection. The operation took place at São Paulo terminal area again. As you can see here, it was a civil-military cooperation in Brazil between avionics service and Department of Airspace Control as well. Knowledge acquired from the previous operation was useful for the viability of this mission, as again, military legacy. 2000 smuggling combat in the west border, 2014 World Cup, and 2016 Olympic Games. RPAS, or RPA pilots from Brazilian Air Force, have given the support for this operation. So, now I'm going to talk about the growth of UAS operation, more specifically from 2011 to July 2018. As you can see here, we closed 2011 with 21 airspace access requests. 2017, more than 16,000. And until July 31st, we already had almost 15 airspace access requests in Brazil. This growth is due to education process already in place in Brazil. So, in order to face up this growth, we already had some initiatives in Brazil. The first one, in order to face up the UAS operation, the Civilian Aviation Secretariat, an organization under the wing of the Transportation Ministry, established in 2015 a multi-agency working group composed by the federal stakeholders such as Justice of Ministry, National Civil Aviation Agency, National Telecommunication Agency, Department of Airspace Control, Brazilian Customs, and Defense of Ministry. As a result of that, the Civilian Aviation Secretariat issued in 2016 a guide regarding UAS operation oversight. The guide was widely spread before the 2016 Olympic Games. The document had all the required information for the UAS operation. As already shown by Mr. Jorge, our document is a live document. The RPAS committees are composed by military From regional bodies of the Department of Airspace Control, we have each year 2 meetings in Brazil. The main goal is the local rulemaking process according to ICAO principles, Doc 119, and so on. Local and international best practice, and UAS technological evolution. A partnership among regulators, academia, and the industry, already in place in Brazil. Our goal is technological solution, move forward to the integration. Local symposia, the first one will be handled in March 2019. You all invited to do that. Operators, industry, regulators, and academia will take part of it. The main goal will be the community's education, always. The Brazilian authorities are aware of the worth of the UAS technology. So our mantra is technology, technology, education, and education. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Enjoyed the video as well. You're going to see on your programs, the next speaker was intended to be a Mr. Edgar Reuber from Eurocontrol. Unfortunately, Edgar was ill and unable to travel to Chengdu. So our friend Mike Lazone has offered to present Edgar's slides for him. Mike is the UAS Air Traffic Integration Manager for Eurocontrol and provides policy support to the European Commission regarding UAS integration issues. He has been involved in RPAS since 1999. I think you've got me by 1 year. And was the main contributor for development of the RPAS Research and Development Roadmap. He is currently the Secretary General for JARIS and the Vice Chair for the ICAO RPAS panel. Please welcome me in joining, or in welcoming Mike to the stand.
Well, I start with an apology because I thought I had the day off, unfortunately, but I will get you through this presentation on the military side. Edgar's presentation is more on a higher level about civil-military cooperation in Europe, mostly from an airspace management perspective. And if I look back in the 1970s, when I joined the Air Force as a controller, airspace management and civil-military cooperation meant something completely different. Actually meant at 8 o'clock in the morning, the supervisor would tell me, Mike, activate. And it actually meant activate all the restricted airspace that was there. All the temporarily segregated airspace should be activated because when you don't use it, the civils will steal it. Now we've come a very long way on that part. So we'll start with that. Who is the military? Of course, apart from being the governmental regulator, they're also a service provider, military aircraft operator, airspace user, air defense organization, and military certification organization. So that's the part where they are basically also doing the same thing on the civil side. They are also considered to be, at least for Europe, the biggest airline. 150 main airports, more than 3,000 combat aircraft, more than 1,000 transport aircraft, over 7,000 helicopters and light aircraft, 2% of GAT flights in 2007, which actually means in OAT flights, in IFR and VFR, cleared to 3 million flights. And of course, looking at today, that would be even more. So what do, the military? They train and exercise to be fit for purpose. They do the national airspace security parts, aerial surveillance, air policing, and of course, live operations. Now have a looking at the stakeholders in the European network. Of course, that's the military. We have the airlines and the general aviation part with the sport and all the leisure people working on that side. We have the airports, we have the air navigation service providers, and of course the traffic flow and capacity management units in Europe. And they are all actually competing on airspace. And that's of course a very limited resource. So how to satisfy the stakeholder requirement, and it's done to the flexible use of airspace collaboration decision-making process, which is now called the advanced flexible use of airspace collaboration process. So how does this look? Here we have our airspace users. And looking at this part, we have, of course, the airspace route and availability. We have the capacity part at the air traffic services, and we have the air traffic demand. So looking at the airspace management part, it's a nice balance between that side. We have the balance between the capacity and demand through air traffic flow and capacity management. And last but not least, of course, it's the airspace route availability and the capacity there through the ATC part, or the ATS part. Now, looking more and more concentrating on the airspace management part for Europe, what we're doing at the moment in Europe is looking at the airspace as one continuum. So we don't have a real civil or military perspective of that part. So how this is applied is actually to really start working together with everybody, and that's based on trust. We have these 3 airspace management levels, which starts, of course, with the strategic part. We have the pre-tactical level, and we have the tactical level. So how this incorporates on the military side? Well, of course, on the strategic level, it's the high-level civil and military bodies where they decide on an annual basis what the requirements are and how these are to be divided. On the pre-tactical level, it's a day-to-day airspace application on that side. And for Europe, we have these joint airspace management cells where civil and military planners are sitting together to optimize these things. And on the tactical level, of course, we have the appropriate civil and military ATS units. So to make this work, you really have to have actual data, and you need to update this airspace management data to make it available. You need to create a real common situational awareness, and this decision-making process, like I mentioned, is really based on trust. And of course, there are some tools on part on this. Now, I've added a few slides to Edgar's presentation to show you in practice what this really means. This is about Malta. And some years ago, Malta was confronted with a huge amount of traffic coming from Italy, going to North Africa, mostly reapers, predators, and the global hawks. Now, Maltese airspace is very conveniently located in the middle of the Mediterranean, and with the increase of traffic from Turkey through that airspace, it is actually quite complex. And when they were confronted with this, it actually made it quite difficult because there were no open scenarios in regard to separation. The only thing we had then was creating corridors, huge amount of corridors, restricting a huge amount of airspace for the civil side. So they were more flexible on that side, and what they created in these corridors, unfortunately, initially on paper, you can see here that we have 30 miles around this aircraft in a corridor that is segregated from other airspace users, which is quite a lot. This actually resulted into, in more practice, having the moving bubble concept what I discussed earlier this week. And this is still the same 30-mile separation or area and space around it with increased vertical separation by 1,000 feet above and below. But that means this movable bubble concept ensures that the airspace is available for other airspace users. And that made it quite easy to use. However, there are some operational issues. Because the minimum lateral and vertical separation minimum are simply not known. The corridors and the airspace that are to be used was actually quite restrictive. They had a big issue with the flight planning part because the military flight planning were not basically easily adapted or accepted in the flight plan handling system of Malta. So they basically used a huge pressure on the AIS people to make that in. And of course the use of frequencies, the data link and the emergency procedures were all different per aircraft, but also per unit that were using them on that side. So looking at this, ATC applies the technical activation of these corridors. That is initially how it goes. But in practice, they manage the RPA as a single aircraft when they have radar coverage and radar identification, and increased on this bubble concept with the separation increase on the minima. That means that the airspace is not really segregated as long as the RPA is operating GAT. Unfortunately, the flight plans at that time were also OAT. So that meant a lot of confusion within the Maltese ANSP in how to handle these. But the moving bubble concept proved to be quite useful. Now, other part was that due to the many corridors, the operational concept of bubble basically was quite useful, but also increased the workload of the controllers to a certain extent. Because there were too many dedicated radio frequencies used per aircraft, also the direct pilot communication with the local comm space, it was really difficult for them to maintain this, and it was not easy to start moving forward and having the lessons learned. Also, it was quite difficult for ATC to distinguish initially when they started what type of RPA it was, and also the associated letter of agreement on that part. So mainly what they did afterwards is agree predetermined call signs to know if it was a Reaper, if it was a Predator or a Global Hawk. Now, the communication part is the part where they were really faced with the latency issue. So there was a huge time lag between the pilot-controller communications. What was not on the slide also, that sometimes the pilots didn't even react. So this actually made it quite difficult to maintain this separation on the moving bubble concept if the pilot was not using this part. Last but not least, the navigational issues. When they had strong headwinds or crosswinds, then there was a continuous change of heading. And of course, they were using the NDS procedures, which means that they would accept the flight plan as is and respect the route and all the elements that were there as is. But if they were constantly changing, even as far as 5 nautical miles left or right of the corridor, it basically means an increase of a lot of issues. And of course, due to some met conditions, not only the wind but also on icing parts, there was always a frequent request for deviations on the route, but also on altitudes much higher than initially envisaged. So this is how they have adapted. So looking at the flexible use of airspace part, initially it gives you a lot of flexibility, but on the other part it's quite rigid in regard to what is laid down. And in Malta they stepped over this part to go even further to accommodate this huge amount of demands moving from Italy to North Africa. And that is all from Edgar.
Thanks, Mike. I think that presentation showed lots of the issues that have been talked about this week, things such as being innovative, moving forward. There's lots of people in this audience that have probably been here from the days of there's no way that's going to get into the air to now being treated almost in a very, very similar to a manned aircraft, although it shows we're not quite there yet. Okay, for the next presentation, we're going to see a true demonstration of civil-military cooperation, and that the two presenters will be presenting off the same deck, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce them both. The first is Lieutenant Colonel Matthias Grall. He's an expert for air traffic management in the German Federal Ministry of Defense. He is a military advisor for the German member to the ICAO RPAS panel, who happens to be Andreas Udovic, sitting next to him, and a member of the Work Group 3 Detect and Avoid group. His operational background includes more than 10 years of experience as a civil and military air traffic controller, both in an area control center as well as in a tower. Matthias has been involved in UAS field since 2009, with experience in operational and regulatory work for ATM and UAS operations in national and in international airspace. This includes RPAS airspace integration efforts on a national and international level, as well as involvement in civil-military cooperation within German airspace and their ATM system. Following Matthias will be Andreas Udovic, who is the project manager at DFS German ANSP provider, Germany ASP provider. Andreas has been involved in UAS since 2003. He holds a degree in psychology and has been working with DFS since 2001 as an expert in human factors at the DFS Research and Development Center. Andreas is the German member, as I mentioned earlier, to the ICAO RPAS panel and supports Work Group 6 on ATM integration issues, and also participates in several national RPAS-related working groups. So please welcome the two of them to the stage, one at a time.
Mark, thank you for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, we, Andreas Udovic and me, we feel very honored being invited to this symposium here and having the chance of giving you the chance, for example, of a short overview on civil German military cooperation in our airspace. Does it work? Oh, okay. We will only focus and refer to RPAS operations, and to show you how good the German civil military cooperation is, we have a common presentation with the first part with me, giving you the overview of a German MOD position, and thereafter Andreas Udovic will refer from a German ANSP position. So what were you talking about, and where do we derive our experience from? We have 7 test flights in a German airspace with a Eurohawk, which is based on a Global Hawk RPA. So we have assigned emergency landing fields. We have approach procedures in place for these flights. We have briefed emergency fire brigades, technicians, so that on every emergency landing field, they know how to handle this aircraft. We have coordination procedures with a letter of agreements, for example, for the airspace use and for applying how to operate the aircraft and how to use the airspace and to get the restrictions on it. And we have contingency procedures in place in order to handle the emergency situations. The airspace integration and the safety assessment was done in a close cooperation with our civil partners. There we did a common safety analysis with the involvement of the ANSPs, the regulators, and of course the Ministry of Transport. Then we had a very huge exercise in 2014, which is a NATO exercise, Unified Vision, where we tried to apply, or we applied the procedures we did for the Eurohawk flights, as well for this NATO exercise. And sure, we have other practical RPAS experiences on HAIL and MAIL level. And in all these situations, the Ministry of Defense was the military POC, and we called it, we were the spy in the network, because everything was handled by the military side and in cooperation with the civil. The military were in the center and exchanging all the information needed. But civil military cooperation is based on that the sole entity for airspace and giving you a restricted airspace in Germany is the Ministry of Transport. Even the Ministry of Transport is responsible for the civil aviation authorities and the ANSPs providing air traffic services over the German territory. Sure, we have our own military aviation authorities and we're doing air navigation services on military air bases, but of course, for everything which is in controlled airspace above flight level 100, the ANSP are responsible for. We have a civil military integrated ATM system. This means that since 25 years, the ATC control of OAT and GAT traffic is done by the civil ANSP, in this case DFS, so they control military and civil flights in the German airspace. The airspace management, and looking to the presentation from Mike before, is a civil military airspace management cell for application of the FLUA system. And we have on level 1 a civil military decision body in ATM issues. Now let's have a short view on the today's regulation environment. On the one hand side, you're a little bit familiar with that. You see ICAO, EASA, and the National Civil Aviation Authorities, which show you this is the civil world, which is known to you. But as well on the military side, we are facing more or less mirror to that. We have NATO, for example, as an international. We have on the European side the EDA, and of course the National Military Aviation Authorities. We have a lot of military regulation framework for STANACs, for airworthiness, and for flight operation manuals. So we mirror more or less that what is going on the civil side. But The overlapping part you see in the middle is still under construction. So we have to find a common way for the military and the civil side to enable those operations we are seeing on the civil side and the military side for RPAS operations. This leads us to the dilemma that for the airspace integration, we have to focus, first of all, this is our military task, for mission, tension, and war operations. In these operations, we have a military airspace structure. We are applying rules of engagement. We did a SOP, which is a standard operation procedures for the missions in specific areas of engagement. And of course, we do an operational risk management. So there is no specific requirement for airspace integration on that part. But how to get there? For the peacetime operations, where we fly according a civil airspace structure and of course with a civil ATC, we are searching for national regulations and harmonized international regulations to enable those flights, and moreover, of course, for cross-border operations and procedures. And here we're facing operational limitations. Today, we have segregated airspace in Germany, which is given from the Ministry of Transport. And why do we need it? We need it for the first time that we are not compliant to the so-called FSAV, which is a national regulation for the mandatory aircraft onboard equipment. So we are not compliant to that, which is a civil regulation. We are not compliant to ANAF requirements for the German airspace structure, and we have no detect and avoid system which is available, approved, or certified. That's the reason the German Civil Aviation Authority demands us for using the restricted airspace, even for civil partners. The MOT, for the good operation, gives us the restricted airspace for our operations and, of course, to our civil partners. Our future outlook is that we aim for an integrated participation of military RPAS, and that we have harmonized procedures to enable a file and fly operations like in a civil manned aviation environment, with a goal to have IFR, OAT operations, and the civil-military cooperation is the key to that.
Thank you, Matthias. You have control. So I will now present the position and views from the ANSP point of view. At first, I want to say thank you to Mark for the kindly introduction. And he has told you that I am working for the DFS, for the German Air Navigation Service Provider. And therefore, I will start my presentation with some words related to my company. So the DFS is founded in 1993, and we took over the responsibility for the air traffic control from the Air Navigation Authority, BFS. By law, the DFS is responsible for the safe, ordinary, expeditious handling of air traffic. Altogether, in the DFS are working 5,400 employees, whereof 1,800 employees are air traffic controllers. We are controlling per year around about 3 million IFR flights. To fulfill this task, we have divided our services in two services. We have the air traffic services and the additional air navigation services. The air traffic services, including the air traffic control services, with our 4 units from where we are controlling the en route traffic, and also the services on the 16 international airports in Germany. Also part of these air traffic services is the alerting services, the flight information services for VFR flights, and the air traffic advisory service. The additional air navigation services comprehends the communication services, the navigation services, and the surveillance services. Also the aeronautical information services. The meteorological services is not provided by the DFS. This service is provided by the German Meteorological Services, DWD. As Matthias told you, in 1996, we have completed the civil-military integration, and from our point, from the DFS point as ANSP, that was a very successful integration of civil-military personnel in one company. Challenge of RPAS integration. Sometimes it is an advantage to be one of the last presenter on a conference or symposium. Most of the challenges that I have here on my slides were presented during the last 2 days and discussed here in the plenary. National and international regulations are based on pilot on board. Over decades, we have written regulation to protect at least one person that's the pilot on board of an aircraft. For example, we have airworthiness regulations that the aircraft can fly. We have pilot licensing so that we have a competent pilot on board. We have the rules of the air to protect aircraft from mid-air collision. And now someone has the brilliant idea to take this pilot from the board of the aircraft and put it down on ground. And therefore, our regulations doesn't fit. So we have to adapt it, the complete regulations. That maybe included the chance to simplify some regulations for remotely piloted aircraft systems. The second topic is the see and avoid as basic principle for collision avoidance. From my point of view, see and avoid is more than collision avoidance. See and avoid comprehends also the detection of hazards like obstacles on ground or bad weather conditions. All this has also to fulfill by a remote pilot, and therefore new systems are needed. We have new technology. Jeffrey presented it this morning. We have the C2 link, the data link. Maybe we have a link that is transmitted from the remote pilot station via different relay stations to the remote pilot aircraft and vice versa. That created new challenges. We could have lost link failures. We could have delay in communication, like Mike presented for the Malta example. So therefore, we need proposals and solutions for that. We have also to integrate new technology, a collision avoidance system, and we need procedure for that. And another topic is the performance of an RPA and the mission of the RPAS. Mike has explained it, I think, yesterday, especially the speed, climb, and descent rate, or the turn rate of an RPAS is completely different than what we have now in our airspace in manned aviation. And that created challenges for ATC and for the ANSPs. And the last point is the integration of remotely piloted aircraft system into high-density airspace. I will show you an example. This is one day in January 2018, the IFR flights over Germany. The red lines are the climbs from the airport. The blue lines are transit flights over Germany. And the green lines are the descent flights to the airport. And the challenge is now to integrate remotely piloted aircraft system into this traffic, maybe with complete different performance and flight profiles. What is DFS doing in case of strategy? So DFS has set up a fourfold strategy to integrate remotely piloted aircraft system and smaller drones, UAS, into the airspace. We are looking to the regulation. We are participating in different regulation bodies. I will present it later on another slide. We are focusing on the operations. We are developing our ATM concept with the integration of the remote pilot aircraft system into controlled airspace. We are also developing an UTM concept together with partners on European level. We have also looked to our existing systems. For example, our ATM system has to be updated if a new squawk will be introduced by ICAO for the loss of seat tooling. So that means we have to reprogram our systems so that the controller has the information of the lost seat tooling available on the air situation window. We are also programming at the moment our own ATM system that will be maybe available next year. From the economics point of view, we are looking to the market, to the UTM market. We see a chance as ANSP to go to this market, to make a business there, and we also earn money by project acquisition. So we are running projects financed by national and international research programs, and we are conducting projects financed by the industry. We are participating in very working groups and panels from the international global perspective. We are participating on the ICAO RPAS panel. We are a member of the CANSO US Global Task Force, or RPAS, working group. On the European level, my colleague is member of the EASA Rulemaking Task Force. We are a member of the European Commission Council. We are participating in different standardization bodies. On national level, we have a close contact to our Ministry of Transport. We are member of the German Drone Council. We are participating in different working groups together with the Ministry of Defense or with the German CAA, and we are participating in different national industrial standardization groups like DIN. What has DFS done together with the Ministry of Defense in terms of projects? We've started in 2003 with different projects that we are conducted together with the MOD. The first project or program was called WASLA HAIL. WASLA is a German abbreviation, so therefore I focus on HAIL, High Altitude Long Endurance. We are participating on project 2 and 3, and we investigated the integration of a high-flying, remotely piloted aircraft into our airspace. We are conducted a series of real-time simulation to investigate loss of the tooling and the related procedure. We are investigated RT delay in the communication between the controller and the remote pilot, and we investigated also traditional emergencies and emergency combinations like engine failure or transponder failure. To summarize the results, an integration of one RPA with a lower performance than manned aviation could be done as long as the remote pilot can act on clearance like manned pilot. The only difference that we could find was the higher workload for our controlling by controlling these RPA with a lower performance. Another project that we are conducted together with the Ministry of Defense was the project or program FUSIL 1 and 2. We validated in this program a ground-based detect and avoid system. This ground-based detect and avoid system was triggered by DFS data, and the remote pilot has the information of the surrounding traffic in his remote station. The detect and avoid system alerts the remote pilot and gave hints how he can solve the problems. The integration of the Eurohawk outside segregated airspace was also explained by Matthias, so I think that was a very successful cooperation between the MOD and the DFS, so that at the end we can conduct 7 flights outside segregated airspace. An upcoming activity will be the possible NATO global Hawk flights in Germany. Therefore, we have also to define procedures and rules. My last slide will summarize the operational requirements from the DFS point of view. Also, most of these requirements were discussed during this panel. See and avoid as one of the core principles in aviation has to be fulfilled by the RPAS. And from my point, it's not only detect and avoid, detect mid-air collisions, it's also to detect other hazards like obstacles on ground or bad weather conditions. Lost sea tooling and the related procedures. The lost sea tooling procedure shall be defined by ICAO, and all RPAS, manned or civil or military, has to follow this procedure. The procedure must be easy and clear, that the RPA can be programmed and predictable for ATC. That sounds easy, but it's very complicated. We are discussing this topic now in our remotely piloted aircraft panel since 4 or 5 years with different proposals and solutions, and I hope we can present a proposal for a solution at the end of the year. Performance of the RPS. Performance of the RPS is one critical issue for us as ANSP. Slowly flying RPAS with bad or low climb and descent rate can block our airspace. So at the end, it's a capacity problem that we then created. Only one aircraft can fly during one time in this airspace. To solve this problem, maybe a performance-based approach can be used. My requirements here are for high-density traffic airspace, for sectors with high traffic load. Maybe for sectors with lower or medium traffic, these requirements must not be so hard. For example, the delay in the communication between ATC and the remote pilot in a sector with high traffic, not more than 2 seconds. Maybe over the oceanic, this time can be enhanced. And this could be done also for the other topics like see and avoid or like the performance problem. And with this remark, I will say thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Matthias and Andreas, for your presentations. I'll just remind the audience that we do have the app up, and we have received a few questions that we will pose to the panel as we go along here. Feel free to jump in. Go ahead, and you'll need to share those mics that are there. Start with the first one. I'll leave it out to the group. Is the military-civil cooperation relevant to high-altitude operations? As we move towards drone enable, and the second day of drone enable, there's going to be some discussions on high altitude above 60, even as an example, but even in the higher altitudes in the high-level airspace, is the civil-military cooperation issue still relevant in those altitudes?
I take this. Yep. I take this one. 1, 2, read. Okay. Of course, because first of all, you have to bring the aircraft to this altitude, and when it's there and it's controlled, for example, by civil ATC, behavior of the aircraft, contingencies and special occurrences may be coordinated so that the civil air traffic controller is aware of what can happen and when it's happening. Closer to that, okay. And if there's something happening, that he's prepared and pre-planned for the further work.
I totally agree with the answer from Matthias.
And it depends a little bit also from the airspace structure. In the United States, the airspace is limited to 600, flight level 600. In Germany or in Europe, the upper level is 660. So normally also high-flying RPAS are part of our controlled airspace.
Okay, thank you. The next one I think I will address to our friends from Brazil. Do states with a strong military RPAS program have a more conservative approach to technology and innovation than those that are conducting civil operations? Okay, I'll repeat the question. Do states with a strong military RPAS program have a more conservative approach to technology and innovation than those that have a more civil-focused operations? Yeah.
Okay, I will try to respond that. We have in Brazil a big concern about the technology operation in order to maintain our sky safe. So in our military operation, we already have some concern about that. So we have a lot of meetings in order to discuss these issues in technology. I don't know if I answer your question.
Okay, thank you. Yes, of course.
Just to complete, George, the pressure of industry, the pressure of technology is real, and we feel it in Brazil. But our concern, our focus is to keep the access of our airspace safety first, and trying to make it this possible to access, but always respecting the safety for people and manned aircraft.
Okay, thank you. I think maybe I'll ask one of my own now. With the prevalence of the smaller UAS, drones, if we want to call them that, how is that being addressed from a civil-military cooperation, both either the military using them, or let's say the military being impacted by them, somebody operating a civil near, let's say, a military installation?
Well, the experience that I basically learned from the Irish, for instance, was that there were already incidents close to military airports, but of course with the availability of very good primary radars, these things are being slightly dealt with, but it's an issue that is addressed. What I'm missing from the civil perspective is the input from the military in the whole UTM discussion, because they will be impacted, especially at low-level flights, be it jets or be it helicopters. And for now, there has been no interaction. And like you mentioned before, the military have more than 4 decades of experience with RPAS, and it makes no sense in reinventing the wheel.
More from the operational side, of course we're using small drones or systems in German airspace from the military side, but mostly in restricted airspaces for our operations where we need them. And whenever we are outside of restricted airspaces, we have regulations in place which allow us, like on the civil side, to use those systems in respective airspace classes.
Okay, so to follow up on that for your side, have those regulations that the military operate under, have those been coordinated and are the civil side aware of those regulations?
The regulations were done on the civil side, but they are not restricting us, as we already bound us ourselves to use them most commonly in restricted airspaces, because we would like to play them in games where others don't want to see us.
Yep.
Maybe from the DFS side, we are more or less not involved in this topic. If they are flying with very small RPA or drones outside segregated airspace, we have normally in Germany airspace G, and that's uncontrolled airspace with more or less no responsibility for us. If they want to fly nearby an airport, then they need a clearance from our tower controllers, and that's then part of the regulation that is in place in Germany.
Okay, thank you. Let's go back to the, this might be a first, a question to the moderator. In your own transition from military to civil RPAS work, what were the most helpful lessons you were able to apply? Okay, I'll go ahead and give that, but I think I'll also ask Mike, because I know he was previous and went to military. I guess the biggest lesson I've learned is the challenges between the military and the civil are the same. They want to get into airspace, they want to do their missions, they want to get the job done, and the challenges become very similar in that they need to be trained well, they need to meet airworthiness certifications, whether that's a civil or a military certification requirement, but the challenges between the two are very similar. It's just the mission that they're trying to get accomplished can be more challenging. Mike?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Interesting was the similarities on both sides. Just like you said, it's the airspace usage, all the elements in there. It's also, I think, from both sides, a kind of lack of understanding what are really the appreciations from both sides and what are requests and the wishes on that side. I think being working on both sides makes it easy to tie these both things together. Also, the interesting part is with the OAT flight planning part, where normal the jets or the transport aircraft would file OAT flight plans and then they were accommodated in the airspace because they didn't have RVSM or didn't have 8.33, for instance. We would accommodate them in the civil part. And you can see now, just like you said, let's say the integration challenges and obstacles are identical from both sides, because this cannot be handled by simply filing an OAT flight plan. They will have to have detect and avoid, they will have the contingency issues, the C2 link part. So that's the part where I think we really need to start working a bit more together, specifically on the low level, to make this work.
Okay, thank you. Well, again, I'll go to one of my questions to Mr. Vargas. How was the Brazilian Federal Police experience in using RPAS applied to the military RPAS operations in Brazil? So how did that transfer work, and was it effective?
Yeah, in fact, Brazilian federal policy was the first unmanned flight in Brazilian airspace, and they knew how to fly, but they didn't know how to use the sensors. And the military squad applying the experience from Recon Squad, they had the experience to use the aircraft sensors. So they work together, and until now, they are working together and obtaining excellent results for their missions.
Okay, thank you. Back to one from the audience. I guess I'll leave this open to anybody on the group. What is the first step for civil-military cooperation in accommodating, integrating RPAS into common airspace? First step, maybe the most important step.
I can answer in one word: trust.
That was a simple answer.
So I think for the first step will not be the full integration, it will be accommodation. That's what we are doing in Germany with the Eurohawk flights. That was not an integration, a full integration, it was an accommodation. And maybe based on the experience that we have gained there, we can start with the integration. And one of the first steps is the technical equipment of the RPAS related to the reliability of the data link, detect and void system, and so on.
Okay.
Apart from the trust side, I think it's also, and it's a repeat, I think, from yesterday and the day before, is really to create a common understanding of the issues. I mean, if we talk about manned aviation, everybody talks about an ILS in different technical levels, but they understand exactly what it is. And here, there are common problems, but there is not a common understanding. So that's also a part that needs to be worked at.
Okay. I guess seeing as you have the mic, I'll ask you one of mine. Being from the Eurocontrol and being a sort of multinational, from a strategic level, how does the military-civil cooperation work with, let's say, other similar type organizations, NATO, et cetera?
Well, the civil military part in the Eurocontrol is done by the military division called CMAC. They are involved in all these issues and work together in all the normal fora within the Eurocontrol environment. But they also participate in NATO and European Defence Agency issues. So they participate actively in the working groups and research and development ongoing in NATO. So in the development of the STANAX, you well know, also for the detect and avoid part. And that is the part where they also bring in the civil requirements and be sure that what is developed there and what is done there is carried on both sides.
Okay, so some of that transfer happens within Eurocontrol and then brought over. Okay. Mr. Regis, seeing as the mic is next to you. I believe it was in slide 22 you showed the increase in the amount of UAS and RPAS requests. How are the Brazilian authorities dealing with this, and are there issues from a civil-military cooperation perspective that need to be considered with such a rapid increase in operations?
Good for your, thank you for your question. Really, the vast majority of this operation happen under condition that doesn't require some ATM analysis or authorization to fly. However, in Brazilian, we have a task force in order to face up the other 10%, so almost 10,000 requests. So that is our job there.
Okay, thanks. This is an interesting one. Maybe by a show of hands, with the different civil and military, which group has more lessons to share, the civil or the military?
I can start. So we can, as ANSP, learn a lot of things from the military side. Who is flying remotely piloted aircraft, large remotely piloted aircraft system? Only the military at the moment, more or less. They have gained experience related to the data link, related to procedures, related to the tactic on board. And I wish that we can share this experience so that we can integrate then the remotely piloted aircraft system into the airspace.
Okay, I think if we think smaller, what about on the small scale, small UAS, who has the most experience, civil or military?
To be honest, I would prefer to answer to the first question, because the second question is referring to that was I already saying that, because there is no, according to the German airspace structure, and that was Andreas was answering before, we are not so deeply involved with the small drones on the civil and the military side. But referring to the question Andreas was answering, I would like to say it's a give and take. So both sides can learn from the experience from the other, but from different fields. Remember my slide with the civil world and the military world, where we have the overlapping part in the middle. And this is, I think, where we both gain from experiences and making regulations and talking together. And of course, in the RPAS panel, we bring all the expertise inside to form something which is for the future.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps for our Brazilian friends, how can states share some of the lessons from these type of cooperation activities when some of this information may be sensitive in nature? Because I'm assuming as part of your trials, they weren't all just World Cup kind of trials, they were probably some ones that were more sensitive. When we gain that kind of knowledge, how do we share some of that sensitive information?
In fact, in World Cup in 2014, and please, you don't need to remember the football score, please. We had a command center. We mounted, and inside the command center, we could see all results. The BFP drone when flying, and the recon squadron when flying too. And the men of police and the public safety could see the results, and they were very excited with them. And we started a job together trying to understand how can we use focus the small drones to obtain the same results from that we got in World Cup.
Okay, thank you. Another sort of provocative. So given the increasing wide range of applications of civil RPAS and UAS more specifically, will military experience become less relevant over time as the purposes continue to diverge? So do we think to an extent, do we think that civil-military cooperation will become less important over time because the experiences of the military will be less?
I think that depends on the equipment and on the procedures that we have defined, and that then maybe in the military aircraft, in small one, in large one, if they are fulfill the requirements that we are set up on the civil side, then we can fully integrate it, the RPA in the ATM environment, or smaller drones in an UTM environment, for example.
Okay, I think I'll add to that as well, as I don't think the military experience will become less relevant. I think the civil experience will become more relevant. And it'll be more like manned aviation today, where there's significant to and fro in getting airspace access and sharing these kind of lessons learned through other similar type forums. Okay, a little longer of a question, but I'll ask both from our German and Brazilian. What measures are considered to be taken for avoiding flight conflicts between civil aircraft and military in a case where, let's say, a military aircraft might be approaching a civil route? It's almost going to the Malta example where they had a corridor. If the UAS has decided to not stay in its corridor, were there procedures established, were there protocols already in place between the civil and the military to address those kind of contingencies?
So, as you can see in my presentation, we divided the Brazilian Federal Police area in sub-areas. So, the ATS or ATC unit is responsible for activating each one of them. When a remote pilot intends to change his or her area, they must ask for a ATCO in order to activate another area and deactivate which area doesn't fly anymore. So that's important to understand that ATCO is an important part of this process. No? In Brazil, it works that way.
Always we worry about that flexible user space of airspace. So whatever civilian traffic, civilian operations, or military operations, we need to keep the airspace free and with a possibility to flexible use. That's it.
Okay, thank you. With that, we hit 12:30 to the second. So if you would please join me in thanking our panelists today, and after this, lunch is on, and we will see you at 2 o'clock for the continuation of this afternoon's activities. Thank you.